getting started with area. We have a space here that's 5, oops, there it goes, 5 by 3. We know that it's 5 across, 3 down. How would you figure out how much space is inside this figure? How would you figure out how much space is inside that figure? Mateo?
5 times 3.
Why are we doing 5 times 3?
Well, you can switch it either way, because you'll still get the same product. But if you look, that and 5 times 3 equals 15. So if there's 5 across, if there's 3 rows of 5, then that means that should equal 15.
Okay, you're getting on the right track. How else could I figure out how much space is inside this figure? What else could I do, Caleb?
You could just count them.
Yeah, I could just count them. Notice that every one of my boxes inside that shape is exactly the same size. It is the exact same box. This box right here is worth just as much as this box. It's worth just as much as this box. I don't have one giant box and then a lot of little boxes. They're all the same size. What does that remind you of? Thinking about what Mateo's brain was kind of going towards. What does this space kind of remind you of? Corbin, what does it remind you of?
Of addition.
A little bit of addition, where you can count the space. A little bit. What else does it remind you of, Peter? It is a rectangle, and we will need to know our attributes when you get into area and perimeter. What else does it remind you of, Maylee?
An array.
It does remind me of an array, which is why you can do that strategy that Mateo was talking about of multiplying the length and the width. It's an array. You have rows and columns. Area is all about rows and columns. Area is all about rows and columns. Alright, so what's going to happen is we're going to work in partners. And we are going to use, put your hand down, please. We're going to use graph paper. And the reason we're going to use graph paper is to show space. Now normally when we do an array, we have like dots, for instance. If I was doing a 2 by 5. That's a 2 by 5, is it not? Yeah, that's a 2 by 5. We just did it with dots. You can do an array with M&Ms if you wanted to. You could do an array with squares if you wanted to. We're going to take what we know about an array and then make it look like it takes up space. So my dots, it's kind of hard to think about, how does that take up space? But when I use graph paper, I can see the tiles, or the spaces, if you will, that it takes up. Okay? So let's do a 2 by 5. I've done it on the board with the dots. Let's do it on the graph paper. What is it going to look like on the graph paper? James, what's it going to look like on the graph paper?
It's going to look like little dots on the graph paper and...
Just dots?
No.
So when we do it on the graph paper, we don't do dots anymore. We're going to color them in. How many rows am I going to color, James?
5.
How many? 5. I'll start here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And how many columns to do a 2 by 5, Corbin?
A 2 by 5 is 2.
It's going to be 2 columns. Good?
Mm-hmm. I have another question.
Okay, hang on to it for a second, buddy. What if I was was given this shape right here, and it said, what is the area? One strategy you could use to find the area, or count them. Easy strategy is just to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Easy strategy just to count. But we are already multiplication masters, so let's use that skill. How are we going to use multiplication to help us in this problem? How am I going to use multiplication? Savannah?
We're gonna do 2 times 5.
Why am I going to do 2 times 5? Yes, I have 2 columns by 5 rows. So I could count. That is still a fine option. But I want you to move towards using multiplication because this is just a fancier array. That's all it is. Do we see the array? Thumbs up if you see my array. Thumbs to the middle if you're still a little confused. This is the part where you think about what you know and I'll look around for everybody else. Okay. So what you're going to do in a minute is I'm going to give you some partners. I'm going to give you 3 word problems. They have a specific area for what they're trying to do. Maybe they're building a garden. Maybe they're talking about their backyard. Maybe they're talking about their bedroom. And you and your partner are going to have to draw out the area on a piece of giant graph paper. Okay? I want to see it colored. And on the inside, I know I've made mine count, but on the inside, I want your equation. Now we talked about what my equation is on here, right? It would be a 2 by 5. Does that make sense? Okay. So you're going to have 3 prompts to work out with a partner. I need to see it colored in like this. I need to see the dimensions. Dimensions just talk about rows and columns. This is a dimension, and this is a dimension. I need to see both of those. And then I need an equation in the middle. Questions about what you're doing with the partners? Okay.
It reminds me of last year.
Alright, so let's talk about area. What is area talking about? When I say, or when you did your graph paper today of area, what was it talking about? What were you trying to figure out? Kaylin?
You were trying to figure out how many squares are inside of a square or a rectangle.
Yep. How many square, and we could say that a little bit better by saying square units, because I think you use different units on your graph paper. How many square units is on the inside of that shape? That's exactly what we did today. How many square units is on the inside of that shape? And I think for the most part we worked with just rectangles today. But you could have a square. You could have just a crazy shape that you have to figure out. And again, we say how many square units. It could be square feet. It could be square centimeters. It could be square miles, depending on what you're using to measure. I think most of you use feet today, is what I saw when I looked around. Third is dimensions. And I said that to you a couple of times, different groups. What do we think if I say the word dimensions? What am I talking about? Kind of a tricky one. If I say dimensions, what am I talking about? Jake, what do you think I'm talking about? talking about length and width. Dimensions is all about how long and how wide. So, for example, if I'm looking at my equation right here, my dimensions are 3 feet by 1 foot. It's all about length and width. It's just a fancier, more mathy, more construction. If you're into building things, wanting to be an architect and design fancy buildings, or even building normal things like desks or rocket ships. If you want to build anything, you're going to need to know that word dimensions. That's how you communicate what you're measuring, how big or how small something is. So dimensions, it's just length and width for right now. Now, as you get older, you'll learn about other dimensions. I want to take the time to talk about 3D movies. Raise your hand if you've been to a 3D movie. Ever? Raise your hand if you've been to a 2D movie. 2D movies. 2D movies. 2D movies are every movie ever played. If you've ever seen a movie and it's been on a screen, that is a 2D movie. What that means, that D, 2D, 3D, is actually short for dimension. If I'm watching a movie on this screen, I can only see the length and the width. That's it. It's a 2D movie. It's 2 dimensions, length and width. But when it's 3D and it jumps out at you, you know what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now we have length, width, and some kind of height. It's coming out of the screen at me. That's why it's called 3D. It has 3 dimensions to measure. You can measure, thank you, its length, its width, and then another dimension, usually height. Okay? We won't go there in 3rd grade, but I know that a lot of you have seen 3D movies. That D stands for dimension. So if you want to do anything in the movie industry, you might want to know your dimensions. Okay? All right, units. Units we've talked about. We've been talking about units. What are units? What are units? Everybody's hand should be up. We've been talking about units since September. What are units, Peter?
Units are the things that you measure with.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. What you are using to measure. Yeah, what you are using to measure. Maybe we're counting cupcakes. Rows of cupcakes. That could be what we're counting or measuring. Or maybe we're measuring the area of this room. We probably wouldn't use cupcakes. That would seem a little silly. We would probably use a different unit of measure, such as feet, or maybe inches. That would take a really long time, but we could. Okay? Yeah. Now, just like we talked about in geometry, units is like the catch-all. I can call all of those geometry shapes that we learned about, I can call them all polygons. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. I can call anything that I'm measuring a unit. I can. But is it going to be the best name for it? No. So I talked with Ashlyn and Peter about this earlier. They did on the garden problem. She had 56 square units. Is that wrong?
No.
No, that is totally correct. But that problem told us that we were going to use feet to measure. So a better way to say that would be that she has 56 square feet. Just like when we are talking about square, you could call it a quadrilateral or a polygon, and that would still be correct, but its best name is going to be square. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's going to be particularly tricky in area to make sure you have that right. All right, last thing, stay with me for a second, Lauren, is length and width. What is length and width? And we put them together because in 3rd grade it doesn't really matter. What is length and width? You've seen those words before. I know you have. What are length and width? Harley, what's length and width?
How long something
how long and wide. How long and wide something is. And a lot of people will tell you length starts with an L, so length is always how long something is. Width starts with a W, so width is always how wide something is. But I will tell you that it really doesn't matter. Because a lot of you would say, if I look back up here at this example again, a lot of you would say, well, obviously, Miss Miller, the long side is 3 feet, so my length would give me 3, and the shorter side, the width, is 1, right?
Yep.
But what if I turned my shape? Is my long side still on the same spot?
No.
No.
It's just flipped.
It's just turned. In the long run in 3rd grade, it really does not matter what you label your length and your width. Just like, think about when we did rows and columns. Did it really matter what you labeled rows and columns? No. It doesn't really matter. Now, there will be some teachers that might say, this is always the length, this is always the width. Just go with it. But I'm telling you, in the real world, it doesn't really matter. Okay? As long as it's written neatly and other people can read it. Okay?